You can see the shadow of the cross looming over Jesus' ministry now. You can see where all of this is going. Why? Because Jesus is attacking our religion. He's attacking our self-righteousness. You see, for the Pharisees, fear and self-righteousness was the driving force behind their Sabbath rules. And what we see in chapter 3, verses 1 through 6 is where fear and self-righteousness get us. They get us so afraid. When we obey God because we're afraid of God, we're afraid of His law, we don't delight in His law. When we obey God because we think somehow our self-righteousness qualifies us to be in God's presence, when that is driving us, when that is our religion, what it ends up going to is a place like chapter 3, verses 1 through 6, where we can't even tell our spiritual right from our spiritual left anymore. Here were men who were guarding the Sabbath, guarding their religion, doing what they thought was good, and they're now ready to kill a man because he's attacked the way that they think. He's attacked their self-righteousness. He's attacked their religion. The world, I think, and what I mean by the world, are those outside the church. I think they view us like Pharisees. Here's what I mean by that. Talk to some of your people, some of your friends, and you better have friends who don't know Jesus, otherwise you're not doing your job as a Christian. Talk to them about obeying God's word. Ask them what do they think about why you obey God? See what they say. I think it'll be very telling, because I think that what the world believes about us is that we obey God's law because we're afraid of breaking rules. In other words, we obey God's law so we don't get punished. And we do all this out of fear. Some of you, that is why you obey God's law. And I mean, when you think about the way some of us were raised, it doesn't shock me. I mean, how many of you have ever been on a youth retreat where they do the skit, where there's two kids driving along, one's a Christian, one's not a Christian, and they get into a car accident, and one guy's bleeding out. He's like, "Ugh!" The guy was standing over him, he's like, "I'm dying!" And then he starts to see Jesus, and he starts to tell the Christian, "Why didn't you tell me? Why didn't you tell me?" And you're sitting there as a teenager, I better know Jesus. I better ask him back into my heart again. And then they do the altar call at the end. Have you ever been on a retreat where they do the altar call? Yeah, more of you have been. More of you than, see, you raised your hand at the altar call too, didn't you? The rest of you didn't. You're going to hell. And they do the altar call at the end, and the guy would be up there, everybody, every head bow, every eye closed. Remember that? It's like just a mantra. It starts saying, you've been here for 3 days, and we've told you how you're going to go to hell if you don't know Jesus. And they start in on you, and they start laying down the law on you and how shameful you are, and all of a sudden you're like, I don't want to go to hell. I remember when it was after a Wednesday night service, and it was a particular powerful fire and brimstone sermon, and my brother and I think I was like 8 years old, and he was 6, and we're at it's time for bed. And I'd already asked Jesus into my heart by 33 times about that by that point in my life. And we're up there brushing our teeth, and I looked over at Mark, and he's just got, he's brushing his teeth, and he's got toothpaste coming out like me, and I said, "You're going to go to hell!" And he looked at me and keeps brushing his teeth. His face went pale. I was like, "No, you're going to go to hell. You got to ask Jesus into your heart." He said, "I don't want to go to hell. You got to pray the prayer. Pray it now." And so we went into the bedroom, and I start crying. I'm crying up a storm, and "Mom, I don't want Mark to go to hell." She's like, "What's going on in here?" So she runs in, and the brother and sister, Chuck and Heidi, run in. It turns into a spiritual revival in there. Mark's crying. He doesn't want to go to hell. He wants to know Jesus. And a lot of us have had conversions like that. Hopefully you've been converted since then to the gospel. Because I think that what we think heaven's about, what people think we think heaven is about, is that it's a place for those who are afraid of hell. And heaven's not a place for those who are afraid of hell. I like how Pastor Matt Chandler puts it. He says it's not a place for people who are afraid of hell. It's for people who love God and want to be with Him. And so many of us are driven by this fear, like the Pharisees, and our own self-righteousness. We're just afraid to go to hell, and that's how we live our lives. We have this view that God is waiting to strike us down, but that's not why He gave us the law. You know, the law is something that we're to delight in. That's what the Old Testament says. David says, I lay in bed at night, I think about the law. How many of you do that? You lay in bed at night and you think about it, and you just love it. Like, man, God, I love your law. Is that what you're thinking about at nighttime? David says, I think about it day and night. I delight in the law. We obey God's law. Here's why. Not because we're afraid, but because it's God's way for us to live kingdom life, to live in hope, to have peace in our families and with our friends and in our community, to share the gospel, to know God even more. The Pharisees had lost something, and I think a lot of us have lost the same thing that they lost. That's why I ask you, what is your view of God?